and welcome to another episode of the CLEO Edge Podcast. My name is JC Polanco, and I'm the President and CEO of the Council on Legal Education Opportunity. You know, this is a very big year for us here at CLEO. It's our 55th year serving students, and it's our Emerald Anniversary. We're asking all our listeners and viewers to please go to our website, cleoinc.org, take a look at some of our programs and events. Consider joining us. You know, this May 24th, we have our first annual Spring Bloom at the offices of Goulston and Stores. And on July 7th, we have our New York Yankee Slam. Join us at Yankee Stadium when the Yankees face the Chicago Cubs. Should be very exciting. You know, for each one of our episodes, we do our very best to bring you some of the most inspirational voices from across the country, to shed some light on what it's like to be an attorney in the diversity landscape, to talk to us about history, to motivate us to keep on going. You know, this time around, anchoring our Women's History Month is Professor Gloria J. Browne Marshall, a true trailblazer. You know, in fall 2002, Professor Browne Marshall was a resident fellow and visiting professor at the Harvard Kennedy School. Professor Browne Marshall is also a writer, an activist, and a professor of constitutional law at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. She focuses on law, evidence, gender, and justice. Professor Browne Marshall is a civil rights attorney who's litigated cases at the Southern Poverty Law Center in Alabama, Community Legal Services in Philadelphia, and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. You know, we're so excited to introduce Professor Browne Marshall. You know, not only is she an attorney, but she's a prolific author, having written several books. And cherry on top, Professor Browne Marshall is also a playwright. You know, without any further ado, please let us welcome Professor Gloria J. Browne Marshall to the CLEO Edge Podcast. Welcome, Professor Browne Marshall.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Professor, I can't begin to tell you how excited the members of the board and the staff are that you're joining us today to conclude our Women's History Month. You know, you're an amazing trailblazer. You have an amazing history and a very thorough resume. You know, we've gone over some of that in the introduction, but what I'd like to hear from you is what motivated you to pursue the law and become an attorney and become the trailblazer you are today?
I will say that obstacles, my life situation, God, all of those things were played a part in my becoming an attorney. I remember being a little kid in Kansas City, Missouri, where I grew up, a fifth generation Midwesterner. My ancestors were part of the Exodusters from the 1800s who came up to Kansas from Kentucky. And I found out a lot more about them later on in life, but I just remember being in the Midwest, thinking that's what the whole world was. And then I saw on television this little man, skinny man, with very dark skin, smoking a cigarette. That's how long ago it was. You could smoke a cigarette on television. And he was being interviewed on this daytime show. And he was talking about race and racism and the anger of Black people and all these things. And I said to myself, I want to be like him when I grow up. I remember distinctly the feeling, I still get chills when I think about it. That man was James Baldwin. And James Baldwin was not only a writer and a playwright, but he was also a civil rights activist. And so I always had him in the back of my mind as I was one of these Black kids bussed across town. And the busing experience laid the groundwork for me to see the differences in the fact that the white school I attended had these brand new textbooks, and the schools my older brothers and sisters attended over in the Black school district or side of the school district were the books left over. They had marked out from my school, Southwest High, and then they marked it out and shipped those old books to my brothers and sisters' schools, older brothers and sisters, Southeast High in the Black section of town. So I saw as a very young person the differences in treatment between people of African descent and other people of color. Some of my best friends at that time were Mexican American. And so it was a very interesting time to grow up. Kansas City during that time was considered the most livable city in the United States. And yet I saw my older brother being harassed by police officers and humiliated, you know, with these stop and frisks that were going on back then. So I think my life experiences and one particular experience was one in which I had applied in my college days for law school, for graduate school, for the master's program in business. I didn't know if I wanted to go into business, to law. I wanted to be a writer even back then. And I stayed up all night and I wrote all these applications. I gave it to the postman the next morning. And I was just really excited because I spent an all-nighter completing these applications. And that's when you had to mail them. This is before it was online. And then I found out later that none of these schools had received the applications. The white postman had thrown them all away. I'd also seen how police officers treated certain people, as opposed to other people, and the benefit of the doubt that wasn't given to people. So there were so many things that came up. And then the application that did get through, after I was so frustrated, I didn't know what I was going to do, was an application that was sent off after that group of applications. And that was a law school application. And that was the law school I ended up attending. And from there, I continued to see the differences in treatment, and it made me realize that I wanted to be a civil rights attorney. I wanted to do something about social justice. I wanted to be a spokesperson like James Baldwin was for our condition. And I wanted to help people in my community better see their worth and their value. And I especially wanted to make sure, after taking constitutional law classes, that we better understood the law, and in particular, constitutional law.
It's so interesting, Professor, that you were able to really focus and feel that injustice early on, and to even see it with Mexican Americans that lived near you in Kansas City. Talk about the intersectionality of our history, right? And one thing, Professor, is to read about it and to teach it like I have. Another is to actually experience segregation and busing and what that does to you at such a young age. To know that you could have made a difference in the law so early on. It's so exciting to hear. We often meet people here that share a moment in time in their youth where something happened and they were motivated to make a difference in the lives of people. Now, you realized that early on. Did you have any attorneys in your family that you were able to look up to?
No, we didn't have it. And it's so interesting. We had other professionals in the family, but this was also during the time period in which all the different levels of Black people from all the different types of backgrounds lived in the same communities, because Kansas City is segregated now and it was segregated then. And so you would see, for example, the mother of my English teacher lived around the corner. The mailman lived down the street. The person who had the 18-wheeler truck moved around the corner. I mean, all these people lived in the same community, but there were very few lawyers. But one of the lawyers, Black lawyers, and there were very few, who actually became a judge. And so when I was bused across town, his daughter went to the same high school. And so I had a chance to interact with her somewhat, but there was also a great deal of classism. This idea of the hierarchies, we're all being forced together due to segregation, but this whole sense of, just like Animal Farm, we're all equal, but some are more equal than others. And so that was another issue that I saw right in front of me, was classism, where when I was being bused across town, I was seen as that Black child from across town. But then when I was in my own community, I was seen as this, who do you think you are that you're so fancy you get bused across town? So there was always these different conflicts that were part of the community that helped me better understand in navigating what I needed to do in social justice, that we needed to understand that divide and conquer will only undermine our progress. And so as somebody who's worked in social justice, it wasn't that I had this complex mind formula and plan. It was just that I was able to have seen and brought into my life and spirit my experiences. And then when it was laid out to me, and I think that's the spiritual part of my road, because I also had to accept that these things are bigger than me. And so I needed something. And that was how my religion played a role. I needed to have that spiritual help to better understand what the forces were that are aligned against the Black community's success and the communities of people of color in this country.
Wow. I can just imagine how difficult college must have been. The road to law school was very difficult. And And I would like for you to shed some light as to some of the adversity that you overcame on your way to law school to complete your law degree. If you could tell us, what were the things that motivated you to keep going and to finish so successfully?
I mean, I had money issues. I had housing issues. I had family issues. I lost members of my family, devastating ways. I mean, my family has been one of the statistical ones in which we've lost people to gun violence. I mean, I've not had a crystal staircase. My philosophy is that you handle your situation with grace as best you can. And you don't make your problems somebody else's problem. And I think a lot of younger people should actually think about not making your problem somebody else's problem because things are happening to you in the world. Being ambitious is wonderful. I love ambition. I didn't say greed. I said ambition. So here I am in law school thinking I made a big mistake. The classes are boring. I don't like anything. I'm miserable. I'm wrestling with money issues. All of this is happening to me. My good. And then I was in this horrible relationship. I won't even talk about that. And the reason why I say all this is because I'm in my classes and I'm just about to give up because I'm thinking maybe I'm spending all this money and it's not for me. And then I take a labor in the law class and it was like, pow, this is fantastic. I love it. And I took a gender studies class. Boom. Yes, I can see how law can work with me. I took a constitutional law class and I'm going back and forth with the professor. And I said, then I'm going to have to make a change if this is what constitutional law is. And I was like, wow, constitutional law. Yes. But when I took that civil rights class, I knew I wanted to be a civil rights attorney. I knew law can be a tool for change. And I also knew that law had been a weapon to oppress. And I needed to help people better understand how law had been a weapon to oppress and also be a part of those other attorneys who are using law as a tool for change. So it was within law school, battling all the things I have to battle as a person of color with sexism and discrimination and everything else and money issues, that I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm so glad I stayed. Because if I hadn't stayed within law school and just continued to battle it out, I never would have found my calling within the law.
Well, thank God you finished law school. We have all benefited because of that. I know that a lot of the participants here at CLEO benefit from all of your hard work, as evident by your scholarly work and your book. So we're very thankful that you did. So you finished law school, you have your JD in hand, right? And now you're thinking about, what am I going to do next? Do I go to the public sector? Do I go to the private sector? You know, that decision is one that many of our CLEO participants go through. You know, we're with them in so many of the parts of our pipeline, from high school to college through law school. And we work with them when they ask us, where should I go? You know, what helped you make that decision? What were some of the considerations that ultimately told you what to do? And where did you end up going?
First, I had a state law clerkship in Philadelphia. And then I had a federal law clerkship because I used to listen to what other people were doing. And I used to also go like, what are the white people doing? It's like, where are they going after this? You know, so I said, well, I'm going to watch and see what they're doing, because they really didn't share information. And so if people within your group hadn't done it, then you wouldn't know to do it. And so I just started following them and listening and eavesdropping on what they were doing. And there were many things I wish I would have done differently, but I didn't know about it. And that's why I like to do what we're doing right now, which is telling people, you know, here's half a law degree is not going to get you anything. So if you go to law school and you drop out after the first year, that means nothing. You're not exactly a paralegal. You're not a lawyer. What are you? So you might as well finish the course. Finish the course. Okay. And then afterwards, a law degree can go in so many areas. As we know, it can be politics. It can be teaching. For every aspect of human condition, there are some aspects of law that's connected to it. And so that's why I look at in finding out what is going to hit your passion button, as I did. When I was sitting there going, oh, I've made a mistake. This is miserable, you know, and then taking that class. So take a variety of classes. And that's what happened during my clerkship. I had a variety of cases go across the judge's desk. And so, of course, I saw those cases. And every time I had a civil rights case, it reinstated my feeling for civil rights. And so after that, I looked around and I didn't realize, I was so foolish. I didn't realize how narrow a field civil rights is, that a lot of these people actually have clerkships and then they go into these different internships for civil rights organizations. And I didn't really have a mentor, which was part of the, reason why things were just so extra difficult. Right. But then I received a tip about a job at Southern Poverty Law Center, and that's where I went. So I went from Philadelphia to Montgomery, Alabama, and that was a huge cultural change. And I say to anyone listening, think about going outside of the city where you went to law school, because if there's a law school there are many people who went to law school in that city. Where else in the world can you go? And I think that's really a potential for people that's overlooked.
You mentioned doing civil rights work in Alabama. Now that's the Deep South. I read Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson, and I saw the film as well. I took my children. A lot of my colleagues have read the book. And it was just incredible to see all of the things that were happening in the South and seeing what it was like to be a civil rights attorney there. I must have seen some very interesting things there. Can you shed some light on that for us?
That's where I met Bryan Stevenson. We were baby attorneys, both of us young attorneys. He was starting his own organization back then, and I was at Southern Poverty Law Center, and we used to meet and talk. And then just think of the idealism of saying, yes, what can we do to help our communities? How can we change the world? And I was just at the Equal Justice Initiative at his museums and everything this past summer. And I'm thinking about, here we were, these young people so long ago. And now this man has 2 museums and this major organization. He's known internationally, he has a movie about him, all of this. But no one thinks about that when you're just struggling in the beginning. And that's why I tell people, don't give up. Because you don't know what's in store for you. You don't know where the path may lead. And sometimes you just have to believe in yourself and keep moving, even though you just want to sit down and just say, I give up. But if you can't give up at this point, there's too much invested. So I think just keep pushing forward and you'll see how things unfold. And you may never know what's in store for you until you stay on the road.
Professor, I often share with my students at the Borough of Manhattan Community College at CUNY that we stand on the shoulders of incredible civil rights giants. That a lot of our successes are due because of the hard work that they've done before us. And I see that in you. I see that you realize that as well. There have been some incredible Black women involved in the civil rights process and in the law long before Black women were even allowed to enter into the legal profession. Can you share some of those stories with us? I'm in the middle of your book and I can't put it down. So I see how you walk us through the life of Sojourner Truth and Ida B. Wells Barnett and Mary Church Terrell and Fannie Lou Hamer, just to name a few. Could you shed some light onto some of their experiences in the law well before we were even able to see Black women enter into the bar?
Well, I was working as a civil rights attorney in Alabama, staying in a motel. Now, I won't say it's a hotel, and it's not even a motel. It's a motel because it's one of those very small local motels where you can open the window of the motel and see your car parked out front. And I would be in these little towns doing civil rights work. And it was there I decided to start working on my first book, Race, Law, and American Society. And I was thinking to myself, how long have there been civil rights attorneys like me going out into the field, trying to do the best we can for justice for the community? And so I started my book then. And as I was writing that book, I saw these Black women's names. And I was like, wow, where did these Black women come from? And some of us know about, Sojourner Truth, who was Isabella Bromfie during her time when she was enslaved, but they don't know that she was part of 3 different lawsuits. 3 lawsuits. She successfully sued 3 times. That Harriet Tubman was part of a lawsuit. That these women who were enslaved, they call them slave cases. that they would actually sue for their freedom when their slave masters or slave holders would take them out of the state to a free country or a free part of the country and then bring them back. And that's how the Dred Scott decision was before the court. Harriet Scott, his wife, was the one who said that we need to bring this case to sue for our freedom. Harriet Scott. So the case is Dred and Harriet Scott, but few people think about the woman. We need to think about Charlotte Ray. In 1872, Charlotte Ray is the first Black woman to become a member of the bar. She's the first Black attorney in 1872 at Howard Law School. And so exactly 150 years later, we have Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson in 2022. So from 1872, that arc to 2022, we have all of these women either who were defendants in cases, or they were plaintiffs, or they stood up to the law. And this starts in the 1600s with Queen Nzinga. And Queen Nzinga in Angola, and brings us the DNA of Black women we have today in the United States, because Queen Nzinga stood up to the Portuguese. She could read and write, and she argued her case against the Portuguese to the Vatican for them to remove these Portuguese who were invading her country. She signed a peace treaty in 1622. 1622. So we have Queen Nzinga of Angola that was called Ndongo before the Portuguese changed the names. So many women, and that's why She Took Justice is actually based on a phrase that Sojourner Truth said. She said, women who want more rights need to just take them and not be talking about it. That's what she said. And she's also the one in 1851 who spoke up and said, "Ain't I a woman?" to the white women suffragettes who refused to allow the Black women to be part of their movement when they were trying to get their rights to vote against men who wanted to subjugate all women and give no women, no matter what their race or color or background, the right to vote. So these women stood up against white women who were opposing them, even some Black men. Just to understand what I'm talking about, Booker T. Washington, who was the most famous Black person, he was just like Obama is today. That's what Booker T. Washington was during his time period, wrote a letter saying he did not believe that Black women should receive the right to vote. And or any women should receive the right to vote. He actually wrote this as an op-ed piece in the New York Times. Wow. That women should not receive the right to vote, and he didn't want to support a woman's right to vote. Whereas Frederick Douglass was at the Seneca Falls 1848 convention in upstate New York. And he's the one who told this former enslaved person, became a statesman and traveled around the world. He told the white women at the Seneca Falls convention that if they didn't add voting rights to their platform, then those rights that they wanted of equality would mean nothing. So it was a Black man who told the white women that they needed to have voting rights. And at the same time, when the white women were fighting for their rights, they did not want the Black men to receive the right to vote before them. And these white women were appalled and enraged when Black men received the right to vote with the 15th Amendment in 1870. And so the Black suffragettes were there the entire time pushing for the right to vote, pushing for their right to vote by themselves, sometimes not with the help of their men, against white women and against white men who are opposed to any Black person receiving the right to vote. So Black women have done so much by themselves and sometimes with groups, but we've had to carve out our own freedom. And that's why my ability to carve out my freedom is based on standing on the shoulders of so many other Black women who carved out their own freedom. I want there to be more Black female law firms. You know, I think we have to carve out the different ways in which we are seen within the law. Being a judge is a fantastic thing, and people really ascend to that, but there are so many ways in which the law can be a better tool for Black women. And I hope we begin to see, even creatively, how we can use the law to better our profession, better our condition, and better our communities.
You know, you mentioned something interesting about diversity that I want to pick up on a second. But, you know, I've been an educator for 23 years, and I'm learning so much from your latest book about the role of Black women in the law and in history. Why is it that you think we don't discuss these issues more? Why isn't it part of the curriculum in schools as much? I mean, it would be incredible to hear these stories. What is your opinion on that?
Well, first, right now, there is an anti-Black history movement taking place by some conservatives, not all conservatives, because it would be empowering. And this country's history has been one of undermining the progress and the power of African Americans in particular, and other people of color as well. So they're not going to give us information that's going to make us see the power we've had in the past so we can be empowered to do even more in the present and the future. I also think, and this is the other one, is that when I studied law, for example, Mapp versus Ohio is a case that everyone is going to study in a criminal justice class in law school. Nobody says Dalray Mapp is a Black woman. No one speaks of that. And that's in my book, that Dalray Mapp is a Black woman and all of these white police officers are harassing her. And she stood up for her rights because they did not have a search warrant. And because she stood up for their rights, that's when they started to handcuff her and go through her home and find this, illegal pornography that they charge her with possessing. So if they actually talked about the people behind the law, we would see in the cases that we readily study all the time in the law and in our law school classes, that there are Black women and other people of color who are within those cases. Black people in the cases that are brought on behalf of and by African Americans put the conscience in the Constitution. And I coined that phrase. That Constitution was a document that was about the structure of the government and state versus federal rights. And then it was after the 14th Amendment in 1868, in which people of color, in particular people of African descent, started bringing cases before the courts, demanding equal protection and due process and the right to vote, that the prolific amount of case law we have today, expanding rights for everyone of every religion, of every creed, every color, then becomes the law of the land. So African Americans put the conscience in the Constitution, and we need to be able to know what we've done to make this country a better place when it comes to law.
So interesting. I wonder what kind of impact it would have on young people to know those stories and to have that information readily available. I mean, I wish that the media were to spend more time examining that and sharing those stories with all of us so that we could learn more about these women and their role in history. Hopefully we'll get to see that soon. You mentioned diversity and the law. You mentioned wanting to see more Black law firms and Black attorneys and people of color involved in the legal profession. This is something that's very important for us here at CLEO. And what we're consistently seeing is that a lot of attorneys of color are leaving the law, they're leaving law firms. We're seeing a lot of attrition. Now, you mentioned judgeships, and we know that's exciting, but it'd be great to see the numbers increase in those law firms. And, what do you think law firms have to do to keep more attorneys of color on their team and helping them see them grow to the partner level?
I think that there are so many diverse areas of this country and diversity of the practice of law. As I said before, every aspect of American life has some part of law connected to it. This is the most litigious nation in the world. We have more laws, more lawyers, more courts, more court cases than any other country on the planet. We have a constitution that we export around the world, but very few people read outside of the provisions that are needed for their particular areas of practice. One of the things that my classes do, all of us read the Constitution from beginning to end. That's what we do in our classes. Most lawyers have never read the entire Constitution, but they'll smugly say, oh, I know everything that's in there, when they really don't. We don't really follow the Supreme Court and what the Supreme Court is doing. We just read newspaper articles about certain cases that come down the pike. Diversity means that we have a diverse mindset. Not every person of African descent is going to think the same. Ketanji Brown Jackson is not thinking the same as Clarence Thomas. And so we need to understand that diversity is something that's taken for granted within the white communities, because we understand in white communities, not all white people think the same. So then, therefore, we need more people of color, because not every person of color is going to think exactly the same. And not everyone is going to think they're representing their group when they're in the room. But because the wealth and breadth of our thinking will make a law firm better, will bring more creativity to the case. And I think that is something we need to understand, that we have so many people who have so many areas of brilliance that we can't deny a group of people just because of the color of their skin, because then that law firm is denying a possibility of being greater than it is, bringing in more money than they did before, or putting their name even further out is part of being like a stellar part of the legal profession. And I think not having the diversity of thought, the diversity of background, the diversity of intellect when it comes to creativity and the way we view different aspects of the law is undermining the progress of this country, as well as could be undermining the progress of many law firms.
Professor, I think you're onto something. If there are any law firm hiring partners listening right now, you increase diversity, and perhaps you could also increase the bottom line. You know, a lot of companies are also participating in making sure that law firms make an effort to diversifying their ranks, and are requiring law firms to demonstrate something. Are they going out there recruiting? Are they participating with diversity organizations like CLEO in order to determine whether or not this is a firm that they're going to hire to do business with? So if you're a law firm, please pay careful attention. Professor, I definitely think you're onto something. Now, Professor, this is my favorite part of the program. This is the rapid fire round, so that folks that are listening or watching who know you're a superstar, author, professor, attorney, and playwright will get to know a little bit more of the human side of the professors. Just one of us, right? So first question is Android or iPhone?
iPhone. Even though the iPhone I have right now, I wish I would have waited because it's got so many problems.
Am I the only Android guy? It's like everyone's iPhone. Professor, what's your favorite social media platform?
I'm going to have to say that I've started getting myself off of social media. And I'm going to tell you, it was Twitter, but I'm starting to like really kind of pull away because it's gotten too intrusive in my life.
Okay, fair enough. Favorite book?
I would say Their Eyes Are Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. And that's part of, and I love Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And all of his work, I just read time and time again, and they've been a great influence, those books have, for me in what I'm reading. But I also love the Russian writers. You know, and so I'm actually, when I was at Harvard as a visiting professor and fellow, I took a Russian literature class, and I was learning more about Vladimir Nabokov, and I'm studying Turgenev and others, and really like Izbin's plays. So I like the Russian writers as well.
Well, paging Dr. Condoleezza Rice, I think both of you will have some incredible conversations about Russian authors. Favorite restaurant?
My favorite restaurant closed during the pandemic. So you can tell by my voice, I'm annoyed. But, and it was one of those, I like Italian food, but I don't like an overpriced Italian food. And so, so I had these nice places. I live in New York City, as you know. And so, a lot of places are for tourists. But when you find that place, that's the one you like. But there is the other Spanish place I have that hasn't closed yet, even though the neighborhood is starting to get gentrified. But, I get a great Cuban there, so a Cuban sandwich.
We know what you meant. We know you meant the sandwich.
I know, but somebody else might say, what? So it's sandwich. And so, so that's great. And then, of course, I like to cook. I don't like to wash the dishes, but I do like to cook. And so I like to cook, especially during the pandemic. I cooked a great deal. So,
all right.
So that's been great. So I like my own food best as well.
Okay. All right. Last two questions for a rapid round. Which is your favorite movie?
I have watched Hidden Figures probably 45 times. Having lost my husband in December 2016, I would, there's a part in Hidden Figures where they talk about the fact that one of the three women working at NASA during the 1960s to get the space, aerospace program, into a viable competition with the Russians. And if you watch Hidden Figures, it's about three women who are brilliant mathematicians, not known. As you said before about Black women in the law, these are Black women in the field of aerodynamics and math who were not known and played a pivotal role in John Glenn actually becoming going to being the first person in space to navigate the moon. But what really bothers me more than anything else is when I think about this movie is that most people haven't seen it. And it's a brilliant movie. It's brilliantly written. It was nominated for an Academy Award. The women are exceptional and they're down to earth. And this is what I say to anybody in law school. When you're feeling like you can't go on, watch this film. This is something that I do on a regular basis. When I'm having a bad day, when I feel like I applied for something and I didn't get it, because there are plenty of things I apply for and I don't get, I watch this film. It encourages me to go out and just keep pushing. In Hidden Figures, if you have a chance to watch it, you really should. It's an amazing film, and that's my favorite film.
Wow, that is true. That is a great film. Thank you for sharing that. Last question. Who is your favorite Supreme Court justice?
It's got to be Ketanji Brown Jackson. And I covered her nomination process. I was about to say attack by the conservatives, but the nomination process and the way not only that she held, but also showed that she was not one to be played with. And they came up with so many lies about her and tried to really ruin her image through the questions about the cases she had decided as a federal court judge. But, I have a chance because I'm a legal correspondent and actually was at the U.S. Supreme Court in the press area. And I have to see her on the bench asking questions. And it was just an amazing thing because she's a brilliant intellect, as well as somebody you can see still cares about the community. And so those things together just make me my favorite U.S. Supreme Court justice. And before her, it was Justice Sotomayor. And I had a chance to talk to Justice Sotomayor in person. I actually led a class, my constitutional law class, down to Washington, D.C. And we had a half an hour with her with a one-on-one. So yes, so Justice Sotomayor and Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. And I like Justice Kagan too. She's a quieter type, but I really appreciate that these women are on the court and that they are doing fantastic work. And just wish them well and know that it must not be easy, to be in an environment in which we're having such a downturn of progressive rights and a rise of nationalism that's being supported by the Supreme Court supermajority.
Well, Professor, thank you for playing the rapid fire round with us here. Again, it's one of my favorite parts because we get to hear a little bit of what makes you human, right? And I'm sure a lot of our listeners and viewers are happy to know who your favorite Supreme Court justice is. I often hear that the more things change, the more things stay the same. And do you see this in your civil rights work? Do you see some actual change? Do we have a lot more work to do? Are we reaching that mountaintop? Are we seeing the promised land? Is there hope?
I think there's a lot more work to do, but I also think there's work to do when it comes to social justice, civil rights, reformists, whatever you want to call us. That's the problem. We want to bicker over titles and things like that. What I think is important for us to do the work and to do so creatively. I have been in meetings of the Federalist Society and meetings of these conservative groups where they have stolen the playbook of civil rights and social justice activists and lawyers. They've stolen the playbook of Charles Hamilton Houston, and everyone listening to this should know who Charles Hamilton Houston was. And Charles Hamilton Houston, his phrase was about being a social engineer or being a leech on society. So just going to law school and you're not sharing your gifts with your community means that it's a rather selfish motive. You don't have to be a civil rights attorney. You don't have to be a social justice advocate, but you can share what you've gained through a law school training and experience with your community in many different ways. And I talk about that as being weekend warriors. So one doesn't have to be a civil rights attorney. The people who made so many changes over the last 100, 200 years were not all civil rights attorneys. They were people who decided to be plaintiffs. There were people who decided to do the work. But in order to do this, we have to have a ground up way of analyzing these issues. It cannot be civil rights attorneys on Mount Olympus, standing on high with very classist focused ideas on what the community needs that they don't live in. And so Thurgood Marshall could not do the same things that the custodian who was Black could not do. They were both barred. And so he had skin in the game to make sure that change happened and change happened fast and where it should happen. Nowadays, too many people who are civil rights attorneys don't have skin in the game. They're not there being the one who could be pulled over by the police or have been pulled over by the police, and so therefore need to work in these criminal justice areas. I need and want and so wish to have more creativity in social justice and civil rights cases that are being brought. These strategies that are being put together need to be more creative. What Charles Hamilton Houston and so many other women and men in civil rights did was to think out of the box, to be creative about these issues and not keep throwing the same Hail Mary play and thinking no one's going to know what it is. They've stolen our playbook and they are using it against us. I've actually talked to conservative attorneys who've told us they studied Charles Hamilton Houston. That's why they've been so successful. And yet we have too many civil rights attorneys and social justice attorneys and others who when I say this, they're like, yeah, sure, because they don't even give credit to where credit is due. That the conservatives give us more credit in civil rights in the past efforts than the present day people give those strategies. And so that's what I think we can defeat any obstacle coming forward to us. It's just going to murph up and morph into something else. And we'll be ready for that too. But we can't defeat it until we are creative and not going at it the same way people have been going at it in the last 10 to 15 to 20 years, and not focus on elitism, which has been the focus too many times of civil rights groups, and look at grassroots organizations and find out what is needed on the ground up.
Your passion for history shows, right? You got to know your past to know where you're going. And you mentioned something interesting. You mentioned thinking outside the box. I see that in your work. I see that you're writing books. I see that you're writing plays, and I see that you're also working on Your Democracy. Can you tell us a little bit about Your Democracy?
Well, I started off as a little kid as a playwright. So I've always been a playwright. And even when I was working full time as a civil rights attorney, I was writing plays and actually having those plays produced, but I just didn't tell my job that's what I was doing. But now I've come out of the closet about both of those things. And so people know I am, an academic, an activist, and a playwright, and that's all out there. But Your Democracy was created and produced by WHYY, a PBS and NPR affiliate out of Philadelphia. And it is an animated series based on the Constitution so that people can better understand the Constitution, because civics, sociology and other classes, social studies are not being taught in high school. And so that means critical thinking skills that people need for law school, as well as people need individually to figure out their country and what's going on in their lives, is not something that's being given to our young people. So I created this series. I wrote it and I actually host it called Your Democracy. And you can go online and you can find it. It's free. It's available. You can pass it around to any school. Please have it in your school. If you need a primer on the Constitution, the 3 branches of government, the First Amendment, criminal justice, you can go to Your Democracy and watch these 5-minute animated episodes on the Constitution. And I did that for adults as well as young people, for us to better understand and critically think about the world around us. And it's been said that those people with critical thinking skills are less often the victims of dis and misinformation, fake news. So critical thinking skills plays a major role in what it is that we need as human beings in this country where we're being bombarded with this outside information, a lot of it untrue, and it helps us to defend ourselves, defend our minds against this onslaught. So critical thinking skills will be something that we all have to have our young people use. So I hope your democracy is going to be a part of what people use to help their young people in their lives and themselves better understand the Constitution. And my most recent play is Crossroads, and it's about who owns the American dream. Because the other battle is there are people who believe that the American dream is supposed to only be for the majority people in this community or white people in our country, and that everybody else is supposed to get crumbs from the table of justice. And we need to understand that's another issue. And the reason why there's a push against Black history is so that you're not empowered. You don't know your past. And so Sankofa means know your past, better understand your present to plan for your better future. So all these things that we can do in law based on legal history and what's happening for us today can help us build a better tomorrow and a more inclusive tomorrow in this country.
You know, as I mentioned here at CLEO, mentorship is so important. We've had over 30,000 students go through our program, and currently we're seeing that our attorneys that went through our program come back and they mentor the law students, and we have our law students mentoring pre-law students. And now with the Department of Justice funded CLEO program that we're responsible for, we're helping high school students nationally by providing mentorship at that level, because we believe strongly in that pipeline, that diversity pipeline that we're involved with. So each and every step of the way, we want to provide mentorship opportunities for our participants. So we definitely agree with you on that.
Well, as somebody who would have mentors in different places, and they played a pivotal role in my life, when I could get a mentor, it was great. I mean, I just remember one, Sharice Lilly, for example, in Philadelphia, who mentored me when I was going through some ups and downs and trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And, you know, it doesn't have to be as a mentor that you spend all of your time with this younger person. It could be just take someone out to lunch. Spend that hour, 2 hours with them, listen, and then the advice that we in our generation can give to new attorneys could be what it is they're seeking. It doesn't have to be something that is going to be life and death, but it could be something that you could be used as a sounding board to just give them some encouragement. And so I would say, as somebody who's going to encourage my generation and other generations who have been out for a little while in the legal profession to mentor the younger attorneys, I think that's crucial, because they're going to come to certain places where they're going to say, I give up. That's a lot of time, money, and energy put into a training, into a profession, and just say, I give up. And then at the same time, we have law students. And one of the things I say with law students, you can mentor high school students, you can mentor college students, you can share as well. So yes, everyone can mentor, and you don't have to be brilliant. You don't have to have all the answers, but I'm sure those one or two suggestions that will be made will be crucial to that other person's career and success.
You know, here at CLEO, we've had over 30,000 participants come through our program. We have judges, members of Congress, we have partners, we have civil rights attorneys. And, for each and every step of the way, they come back and they want to serve as mentors. So the attorneys will come in and serve as mentors for our law students. Law students will serve as mentors for our pre-law students. And what you see is that it's so important to get students even at the high school level. Fortunately, the Department of Justice helps with our CLEO program, which we run here at CLEO, where we provide mentorship for high school students around the country. We have to continuously remind ourselves, like I mentioned earlier, that we stand on the shoulders of giants who have put their lives on the line so that we can achieve the success that we have achieved today. So we have to continue on that fight and give a service to others.
Yes, and many of these people can be summed up in saying this, as Ms. Browder did: you're standing on my shoulders, get off my shoulders and get to work.
Oh, I definitely agree with that one. That's a good one. But Professor, you're a prolific author. You have so many books, so many essays, so much work you've done. Where can our listeners and viewers go if they were interested in purchasing your books and reading more about your work?
You can go to any of the online bookstores, and I would ask you to go to your local bookstore and ask that they put the book on the shelf. Because many times online, you're going to seek something that you already know you want. But it's in a bookstore where as people browse the shelves, that they're going to find a book they weren't looking for. And that's what I want them to do with She Took Justice, the Black Woman, Law, and Power, as well as Race, Law, and American Society. And I've got the U.S. Constitution in African American context, which is a Constitution book that focuses on the different places within the Constitution that refer to people of color, and in particular, people of African descent, with interesting issues, ideas, and questions and information in the back of the book. And it's indexed.
Wow. Well, we're definitely going to put it up, and we encourage all of our listeners and viewers to go check out Professor Browne Marshall's amazing work and consider buying a book today. You know, the board and the team at CLEO was so excited, Professor, that you were going to join us today. And we at CLEO are very lucky that we have you anchoring our Women's History Month. We want to thank you so much for spending this time with us, shedding some light onto your work and how you see the civil rights struggle moving forward, and providing that most important motivation for many of our participants to keep going. And a lot of lawyers out there in the practice for a long time are definitely going to get a lot of this conversation with you today. So thank you so much, Professor Gloria Browne Marshall, for joining us today.
Thank you. And I hope that it's empowered and will be powerful for anyone who's listening to just keep going. We need all of your resources that you can spare to make our communities stronger and better as we go into this fight, but also going into the future for generations unborn.
Well, thank you again, Professor Gloria Browne Marshall, for joining us at the CLEO Edge Podcast. We hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to another episode of the CLEO Edge Podcast. We hope you found our conversation with Professor Gloria Browne Marshall interesting and entertaining, and most importantly, motivating. You know, as I mentioned at the beginning of our show, this is a very important year for us. It's our 55th year. It's our emerald anniversary of serving students from across the country, over 30,000 strong. You know, we're asking all of our viewers and listeners to go to our CLEOinc.org website, take a look at some of our programs and some of our events. And just as a reminder, we have a May 24th first annual Spring Bloom in Washington, D.C. at the offices of Golston and Stores. And on July 7th, we have our Yankee Slam, Yankee Stadium, where the Chicago Cubs are facing the New York Yankees. Please come down and join us. Spend some time with the CLEO family, get to know us, and I think you're going to have a wonderful time. You know, until next time, thanks again.